This is Alex, and welcome to Barely Braided, where we're taking a deep, deep dive into foster care, adoption, and all things parenting, even the sticky stuff. Hello, welcome to episode 43. And so I think I said it was going to be episode 43, the last episode. And this is what happens when I trust my husband with math. So this is, in fact, episode 43, I promise. And it's been since May of this year that I've had the opportunity to bring on a guest. So today I am so pleased to announce that I'll be speaking with Rita Soronen, President and CEO of the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption. Among other programs, the foundation funds adoption professionals known as recruiters who work to find permanent homes for children in foster care. The foundation is located just outside of Columbus, Ohio. And Rita, welcome. Thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Oh, thank you. I'm so delighted to be having this conversation. Thank you.
Yes, I am too. I know I gave kind of a general overview of the foundation, but can we hear in your words, what does the foundation do? What's the overall mission?
Of course. The Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption is a national, nonprofit public charity, and we have really a singular mission, which is to dramatically increase the adoptions of children in North America's foster care systems. Those children who have been freed for adoption, they're in foster care, and they're simply waiting for a permanent family. And we do that both through raising awareness about the fact that in this country today, as we're talking, there are about 122,000 children in foster care waiting to be adopted. In Canada, there are another 30,000 children waiting to be adopted. And so we do that to raise awareness about that, to make sure that when people are thinking about adopting as a way to create or extend a family, that one of the options that comes to mind is foster care adoption. And then we implement supportive and direct service programs that move these children out of foster care and into adoptive homes. And we do that through grant making, through all of the venues that we have at our disposal for raising awareness and for just making sure that this is a robust conversation in this country about very often the forgotten children.
I love that. Such an important mission. A two-part question. How long have you been involved with the foundation and how did you get started?
Yes, thank you. I'm celebrating my 20th anniversary with the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption, and it has gone very quickly. I even still surprise myself when I say that.
That's great.
Thank you. Thank you. I was so honored to be able to take this position 20 years ago. Prior to that, I had started out, quite honestly, not in child welfare. I was on an entirely different track, but my first daughter was born. We had just moved back to Columbus, Ohio. There was a horrible case of abuse of an infant, and that infant passed away. And so I was in that, I think, receptive mode of wondering, how is it that abuse can be a part of some families' lives to the point of taking the life of a child? So I immediately sort of switched paths on what I thought I was going to do and started volunteering at a child abuse prevention agency here in Columbus, Ohio. That turned into a staff position, and I was there a number of years really learning about what are these dynamics of abuse and neglect? What are the family dynamics? What are the systems that surround children? And then I had the opportunity to take over as executive director of the court-appointed special advocate, the CASA program of Franklin County, again, here in Columbus, Ohio. And there I learned and absorbed and honed my skills on what happens during that process when children are involved in court proceedings. How do we advocate for them, or how do sometimes we miss advocating for what is in the best interest of those children? And then when the opportunity for this position became open, it really was serendipitously, I think, a full circle kind of position. I had been in prevention, I had been in intervention, and now what happens to these children when those efforts fail and they are essentially legal orphans in our foster care system? How can we assure what is really the birthright of every child, which is a safe, nurturing, and permanent home in which they can grow and thrive into productive and supported adults in the community? So it's been an organic journey. I think part of it was because I was one of those kids that came out kicking and screaming, it's not fair when it came to children. And I had a sense of justice as a young child that's really never left me. And so, although I say it's been organic or serendipitous, it's probably the path that I was supposed to be on anyway.
Wow, that is so inspirational. And I love the fact, too, that you were inspired by an unfortunate event that came across your path. And it kind of seems like maybe that event changed the course of your entire life. Isn't that just maybe how it's meant to be?
I think so. I think so. And I think if we open ourselves to those opportunities, that's when really we connect with, I think, our purpose in life. Absolutely. At least
I
it happened
agree.
that way for me.
Wow, I love that. So inspirational. So, as a CEO, I have to admit, I don't think we've ever had a CEO on our podcast. So, I'm very excited about this. What does your day-to-day look like?
Well, it's if you had asked me pre-pandemic, it probably would have been a little bit different than it is now, but ultimately it's very much the same. I mean, my job is to first and foremost protect and enlarge this mission the best that I can, and protect it in the sense that we really stay focused on what is it that by mission and vision we want to do, because we can get distracted. There are so many human needs in this country, in this globe, right? And to stay singularly focused on what might appear to be a very small conversation, children in foster care waiting to be adopted. When we think about the globe of needs, it sometimes can be difficult. So keeping focused on mission, making sure everything draws back to that, but then setting in place a very strategic vision of how do we implement that mission? How do we make a difference? And in that, it's developing and nurturing staff so that they're the best that they can be. It's developing and nurturing a board so that they can feel empowered and engaged in a cause. It's also keeping an eye on, right? I'm ultimately responsible for all of the responsibilities that keep an organization safe and whole, from financial responsibilities to compliance responsibilities to HR responsibilities. And then making sure as we grow, and we've grown significantly over the past 5 years and even during the pandemic, that we still have a sense of every staff, every partner, every grantee that we support feels engaged and empowered and has a voice. And so some days it's like I'm doing right now, talking to media, talking to press, talking to awareness outlets that can help us further this mission. Other days I'm deeply engaged in making sure that staff assessments are on time. Other days it's really reviewing the approved budget and making sure that financially and fiscally we're sound. And some days it's just sitting back and allowing time to think strategically, to think creatively, to think outside the box. How do we fix our problem, our issue at hand, which is 122,000 children in the United States waiting to be adopted? How do we make sure that we engage partners in a way that makes a difference for children?
Wow, it sounds like you have a very full plate of many important tasks.
I'm lucky. I'm lucky to be in this position, to have the kind of partnerships and passionate people. Look, when you have a not-for-profit organization with a viable mission, I think you attract passionate people who want to do the best they can do. So how lucky am I to be able to engage with those folks across the United States and Canada, and right here in Columbus with my own staff?
Well, and I also feel like a majority of our podcast listeners are hopeful adoptive or hopeful foster parents.
Yeah.
And so they have the same values, the same hopes that probably many of your staff have, or that you have the same passions. At the end of the day, they're hoping to help children and that's kind of their mission and their goals. So I'm wondering if they also wish to make a career out of this or delve into this world kind of more than they already are. What would you suggest as a first step for them?
It's a great question. And there's so many ways to get involved, either at a professional level or at a personal level. And professionally, I think, really dive into this conversation. What is the child welfare system? What makes up this journey of a child from the dynamic of a family that has abuse and neglect, or issues of substance abuse, or those kinds of things that drive families into the system? Understand what those dynamics are. Really do a deep dive into what part of that system might you be interested in, whether it's at a social work level, at a volunteer level. Look, it's a legal system by nature at a legal level, at an administrative level. so many different areas where folks can get engaged, even from marketing and public relations, because we have to make sure that this conversation is one that the public understands and sees on a regular basis. And then dive in and say, is this something that I need further education for, or can I just connect with my local child welfare organization and find out what volunteer or potential staff opportunities there are? But I think it's that continuous learning that for me has been so important. Even 20 years in, I'm constantly reading through, new research pieces that come out or media clips that come out that talk about a specific state, because the child welfare system exists differently in every state. There's a federal overlay, but state by state, the implementation can be different. So depending on the state that a listener might be in, what is the structure in that state? How does the public interact with the child welfare system? Where can I dip in? And just make sure that that it's something that even if once you go through that and you think, well, maybe this isn't for me, but it is still a conversation that I can have with my coworkers or at my place of worship or with my extended family members as we get into the holidays, and help them understand that they may have some myths and misperceptions about the system or the children or the families that are in these systems, and just help engage in that conversation.
That's great. And I think it's important to realize as well, and you mentioned this, that there are different skills that you might not initially realize could be very beneficial to an organization like yours. You mentioned you work in compliance or you work in budgeting or forecasting. Yeah. Those are things that I wouldn't initially connect with a not-for-profit or an adoption foster care type agency. And a lot of our listeners may have those skills and also not make that connection. So those skills could be very valuable, just kind of an offshoot to what we were probably intended to talk about. But I know there are a lot of people who want to get involved.
We've had staff who have made the leap from for-profit to not-for-profit here in exactly those areas, in finance and marketing, because they felt that passion drove them in a way that they wanted to be more deeply engaged by using their skills, but toward a cause.
Absolutely. How big is your team at the Dave Thomas Foundation?
We have just, I think, hired our 52nd staff person, which seems really large for us because really 5 years ago, we were a staff of maybe about 20. So we have grown significantly over the past.
That is amazing. I was poking around your website a little bit, and I think I told you this the first time we spoke, is I feel a little rude not getting a big background or doing a lot of research on the foundation before I spoke with you, but that's because I want to be able to ask the right questions. I want to be able to learn right along with my listeners. And so it's fun. It's fun to learn about the foundation and speak with you. So I really appreciate you being here.
Of course.
So let's talk a little bit more specifically about the programs that occur at the Dave Thomas Foundation. Is there one main flagship program, or introduce one to us?
There is one program that takes up a significant portion of our grant making, and it's called the Wendy's Wonderful Kids Program. That's the brand name. And it really was born out of a number of years ago, around 2002, 2003. We were really scouring through our strategic plan and our tactics and doing a great job of raising awareness. We were putting out great public service announcements, materials that we still have today, a beginner's guide to adoption, the kinds of materials and conversations that were helping to raise awareness. But if you had come to me and said, Rita, how many children in 2003 did you get adopted today through your efforts? I wouldn't have been able to tell you, even though we were doing some great national grant making and all of those things that I talked about. But I couldn't quantify what is by mission something quantifiable. When you say dramatically increase the adoptions of children, then behind that word dramatic is something measurable. So we went underground for a bit and began to look at where is the gap that the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption perhaps could fill in this continuum of what children experience in the child welfare system, and really looked hard at the numbers and realized that year over year over year at that point, about 20,000 children were turning 18. They had been freed for adoption, but they were leaving foster care without an adoptive family. In other words, we had broken our promise to them, that promise that the day that the court legally terminates their biological parents' rights to them, we make an implicit promise that we'll find them a family, an adoptive family. And we were failing. And we dug even deeper to find out, well, why is this? And realized that there was a focused population of children that were most at risk of aging out of care. And when you think about it, it feels obvious, but it wasn't something that people were talking about. older children, right? Children age 9 and older, we know by research, the day they turn 9 in foster care and they've been freed for adoption, their likelihood of being adopted decreases significantly because we have a tendency in this country to think about infants when we think about adoption. Children in sibling groups rose to a high risk of aging out of foster care because people tend to not be thinking about adopting 2 or 3 or 4 children in one fell swoop. They're thinking about adopting a single child. Children with special needs, that gamut of special needs. And children in foster care have been through multiple layers of trauma because of the abuse that they've experienced, and frequently, given the length of time that they're in care, because of the multiple moves that have occurred, multiple situations they've had to experience. And so there are children with special needs, from the classic special needs of developmental or physical delays to emotional special needs. And then there are the children, and this makes me the saddest whenever I talk about this, who have been in care for so long that when advocates or professionals are working on their behalf to find them a family, they resist those efforts at permanency. They tell judges they don't want to be adopted. And we understand why that is. Again, those issues of trauma, some of that's just the normal stages of adolescent growth, because adolescents, part of their natural growth is to assert independence. I can do this on my own. But so much of that is layered with the trauma that they've experienced and their mistrust of adults or their feeling of betrayal of their biological family. And so when you put all that focused population together, we looked at, well, what are the practices out there that are working on behalf of these children? And we found some emerging best practices, but nothing at an evidence-based level that was addressing this population of children. So we buckled under, we created what we thought was a good strategy called child-focused recruitment. It's really, really just simply good social work. Carry a smaller caseload of children, get to know them, do a deep dive into their file, find adults that are already in their lives, including extended family members, and you will find potential adoptive resources for these children. And so we began to apply our grant making on a pilot basis in 2004 to 7 pilot sites. And we said, we'll give you a grant to hire a full-time adoption professional that implements this model. And let's see if it works on behalf of this focused population of children. We very quickly saw it working. So we went back to, we're wholly independent from the Wendy's company. Dave Thomas, who was the founder of Wendy's, also created the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption. He was adopted. And so there was a natural, passionate link between the creation of this organization and the Wendy's system, where natural fundraising partners for us. We're the charity of choice. So we went to those partners and said, if you increase your in-restaurant fundraising, help us to get the word out about this, we can grow this program that appears to be working, and we'll send those dollars that you raise back to the communities in which they're raised. We'll get these adoption professionals hired, and we will get these children adopted. We called it Wendy's Wonderful Kids because they responded in a phenomenal way and continue to do that to this day. And in 2004, we grew from 7 pilot sites to today. We have nearly 275 full-time adoption professionals that are working across the United States and Canada and getting these children adopted. We've celebrated a benchmark of 10,000 adoptions. The average age of the child adopted is about 10 or 11. 60% are in sibling groups. 80% have at least one critically identified special need. In other words, this program is serving that population of children. And earlier this year, we celebrated 10,000 adoptions, a benchmark that we had set for ourselves a long time ago. And we are continuing to now grow that program, taking it to scale in states. And for 5 years, we implemented a rigorous evaluation comparing this Wendy's Wonderful Kids child-focused recruitment model against business as usual in jurisdictions, and found that it works up to 3 times better than anything else that's in place. So that's one of our signature programs, but it's one of many other programs as well.
Oh my goodness, this is so interesting. First of all, I did not know, this was going to be my next question, how Dave Thomas and Wendy's, how this was all related. I didn't know he was adopted. So that's really interesting to know, along with, of course, all of your achievements and all of your wonderful milestones. So the adoption professionals, are they, I guess they're not employees of the Dave Thomas Foundation, correct?
Right. We debated that for a long time at the start of this. Should they be our employees? But realized that when you're going from state to state, there are so many differences in employment law. And frankly, what we can do is hold the agency. They're employed by agencies in their communities, either public or private child welfare or adoption agencies. We can hold the agency accountable to the grant. So if they agree to get a grant from us, they agree to certain milestones, certain goals, certain ways of implementing the grant. But they are also then accountable to the agency for their employment regulations, their growth and their development. We also provide a rigorous training program for all of them. We've grown our staff significantly to help with that performance management of the grant, to be there to answer questions, to troubleshoot, to help them through challenges and barriers. And then we bring them all to Columbus. We haven't for the past couple of years, but we will again post-pandemic, bring all of the recruiters and their supervisors to Columbus for an annual summit in order to let them really begin to learn from each other, to engage. And it's just a powerful event when you have more than 500 passionate Wendy's Wonderful Kids recruiters and supervisors in a room over 2.5 days to really, get excited about this notion that children can have families, that those children that everyone else has given up on because perhaps they're in a sibling group of 3 and 2 of them are teenagers and 1 has special needs and they've been in care for 6 or 7 years, and yet we get those children adopted. There's power in that collective voice that these recruiters bring together and for each other.
Yes, so cool. So hypothetically, let's say I'm a foster parent in Nashville, Tennessee. We're moving along towards the path of adoption. And I know, at least I've heard talks of the fact that if you get close to adoption, you are assigned an adoption professional. Is there a chance that in Nashville, Tennessee, that particular person could be affiliated with Dave Thomas, or how would I know?
There is a chance. And on our website, davethomasfoundation.org, if you look up Wendy's Wonderful Kids, you'll then find a map where the recruiters are located, and you can pull down by state where those Wendy's Wonderful Kids recruiters are located. Part of this process over the past few years is we've engaged additional philanthropic partners that have allowed us to have more resources to create co-investment relationships with states in order to take this program to scale in states. In other words, are there enough recruiters in place to serve the entire focused population that we've identified that I just spoke about so that every child in that state has an opportunity? And we're scaled in now 12 states. Tennessee is not one of them yet, but we've got some recruiters there. So the likelihood of getting a Wendy's Wonderful Kids recruiter in Tennessee is a little bit less than in Ohio, where we're fully scaled with enough recruiters to cover the entire population that we intend to serve. But that information can be found on the map, on the website, and then you can certainly reach out and make a call to that agency.
Wow. Yeah, I'm looking now. There are, it looks like, at least 119 agencies just in the United States. This is really cool. Awesome.
Right.
Well, I'm
Yeah.
going to need to look through that. I love that. That sounds absolutely wonderful. Are there other programs that you'd like to highlight?
There are. One of them that, again, goes back to Dave Thomas. When he was active in his CEO role, one of the things that struck him was the inequity of supports for parents in the workplace. In other words, providing benefits to parents whose family is formed through birth, time off, financial assistance, sometimes paid leave, wasn't applied to families who adopted. And understanding that birth is a medical procedure, of course, and so that takes a different level of care and frequently through a workplace. But he began to call his fellow CEOs and ask, hey, if you're giving benefits to families that are formed through birth, why won't you give some benefits to families who are formed through adoption or families who are fostering? And that created what we now call the Adoption Friendly Workplace campaign, which is a campaign that we've grown from that legacy work of Dave Thomas to encourage employers to put paid leave over and above FMLA if possible, unpaid leave if it's not possible, some financial assistance to families. And it doesn't matter what kind of adoption, whether it's international or domestic infant or foster care adoption, but just recognize that families in the workplace could use those benefits as well. And we've turned that into 100 best adoption friendly workplace list. And we know that companies like to be competitive and like to be on lists. And so it's been a way for us to simply provide the toolkits to say it's easy to implement benefits and it's easy to support families. And we know that it creates a sense of loyalty. If employees have a choice between 2 companies and everything else is equal, but the benefits may differ, they'll look at something like adoption benefits. So it's been a great program and support that we love doing. And again, on the website, there are toolkits for employers and employees if your listeners are interested in finding out more about that. There's another program that we are entering, I think our 23rd year, in collaboration with CBS and Triage Production. And it's an annual television show around the holidays called A Home for the Holidays. And top talent comes on the show and it draws people in, but then we highlight successful foster care adoption stories. And it's been a top rated primetime show on CBS for 23 years now, which is unheard of. And it allows us to, again, use our website as a go-to place when people watch that show. If they're so moved by a successful foster care adoption story, then they can go to the website to get more information on how to adopt. And then finally, the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption is the lead founder and funder of the National Adoption Day initiative. We're entering, I think, our 22nd year of National Adoption Day, which is officially celebrated the Saturday before Thanksgiving, but we really use the month of November, which is National Adoption Month, to encourage courts and other places to open their doors and celebrate, finalize and celebrate adoptions. And this was born out of a novel idea in Los Angeles County where a judge who had children who were ready to be adopted, but there was a backlog in the court. They couldn't get these adoptions finalized. He began to open his court on Saturdays, got volunteers in the door to help, and really pushed finalizing these adoptions. And we saw that as a notion of a way to really create a national grassroots effort of celebrating adoption in November, that holiday time when we're all thinking about families. And so the National Adoption Day initiative has grown again from, I think, 10 pilot sites that first year to being celebrated in all 50 states at a very grassroots level, and Guam and Puerto Rico, I believe, and Canada, to just make it a day, a month, a week of celebration for families who adopt. And it becomes a media event. It becomes something that just normalizes this conversation about foster care adoption. If you see in your local newspaper a family that finalized their adoption on National Adoption Day, then you think, well, maybe this isn't as, foreign to me as I was thinking that it was. And maybe I can get some more information about foster care adoption.
Wow, such important work. And each of these programs seem just so successful and they're so involved. There's so much, and there are multiple programs. I'm very impressed with the scope of work and the amount of work. I just feel like it's very involved and it's just great work. Especially the adoption friendly workplace really speaks to me. It really hits home because I did work in a place that I feel was not adoption friendly when it came to maternity leave, which was actually changing just as I was leaving. So if I am somebody who works in a place that is not so adoption friendly, is there a way that I could present the Dave Thomas Foundation or your materials to my human resources department?
Absolutely. And I think it's just it's a, hey, look at this list. We'll be releasing that list in the next few weeks. And again, I just discovered this list of adoption friendly workplaces. And we recognize all the businesses that submit a survey to us telling us about their adoption benefits, but really look at that 100 best list. And then there are toolkits on the website. So it's a first conversation of help me understand why you may not be doing this, or had you even thought about doing this? And by the way, there are super easy implementation toolkits on the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption website. What we do know is that, less than 0.5% of employees utilize adoption benefits. So it's cost effective for employers. Again, it builds employee loyalty. And there are lots of collaborative kinds of things that can happen depending on the size of the business or the wishes of the business. Things like Brown Bag Lunches talking about adoption, or an intranet for adoptive parents so that they can get together at the workplace. So again, it just builds this community and especially now, post-pandemic, as businesses are looking at how to entice employees into the workplace, this becomes one of those just benefits that it's a win-win for everyone.
Wonderful. Wonderful. A Home for the Holidays, I'm assuming, would air in late December, correct?
That's right. We don't have a date yet, but typically it's that week before the Christmas holiday, sometime around there. And it's usually at 8:00 Eastern. So just prime time and on for an hour.
Wonderful. I'm looking at the information from the 2020 event, and I'm seeing these are huge names. Josh Groban, Megan Trainor, Miranda Lambert. This was last year. I'm very excited. And if you're not allowed to do this, no problem, but are you allowed to give us maybe a hint of who we may be able to see or hear this year?
We haven't gotten them all firmed up yet. It does tend to come down to the month of October where we get everybody firmed up. But I guarantee there has not been a year. If you go on the website and look up just A Home for the Holidays, CBS, you'll see all the years and all the incredible talent. The Triage production company in Los Angeles does a phenomenal job of making sure that the talent that is on this show, they don't all have a connection to adoption, but many of them do. But every one of them is top billed talent, and they love being a part of this show.
I can't wait to watch. When a date is nailed down and some of the featuring artists will be announced, I'll be definitely sure to post that on my Instagram page.
We'll let you know as soon as we know as well.
Yes, please. This is going to be kind of a broad question based on the scope of work that you do, but what are some of the obstacles that the foundation faces?
Yeah, it's interesting because there are still so many myths and misperceptions that surround these children, that surround the child welfare system. And some of them, at least on the child welfare system, are based in truth. So, for example, as we try to encourage people to think about foster care adoption, we also do a regular national survey, both in the US and Canada, about Americans' attitudes toward foster care and foster care adoption. And year after year, we find that a large number of Americans still believe that children are in foster care because they've done something wrong, that they're juvenile delinquents. So there's this sheen of fault that surrounds children in foster care when nothing could be further from the truth. They're in care because of abuse or neglect and through no fault of their own. But if that perception is still out there with nearly a majority of Americans, then that's a challenge right there in even getting them to engage in the system, to think about this as a viable means of adoption. It's not to say that they don't sometimes have issues. Again, the trauma that they've experienced may result in some behaviors that can be managed, but have to be dealt with. But that's not every child that's in foster care. We also know that there's a misperception that, it's just too expensive, because people understand that to adopt internationally is fairly expensive. It can be anywhere from, $20,000 to $50,000 because of travel, because of fees, attorney fees, those kinds of things, or even a domestic infant adoption can be in that same range. To adopt from foster care, and sometimes I hesitate saying this because it's not that these children are any less valued, but because they're part of a government system, a county or state system, then that system covers the costs of moving this child to adoption. There may be some minor costs of finalizing a home study, or if the family chooses to hire an attorney to get through the process. But what we say is it's anywhere from $0 to maybe $1,000 to adopt from foster care. So if people are stopping and not adopting because they think it's too expensive, foster care is one of those routes. And then there's this perception that, I don't want to adopt because I don't want that extended family. I don't want that abusive family involved in my life, or having them come back and trying to claim this child legally. I don't want to be involved in court proceedings after this, thinking I might lose this child. And some of that comes from, I think we've all seen media stories where perhaps an infant adoption, something happens and the biological family is somehow legally allowed to take that child back home. That can never happen in foster care. When children are freed for adoption, that's a legally final determination from the court. And so the family cannot legally try to reclaim this child. Having said that, with older children being adopted, there are extended family members that may be important to that child. And it's up, though, to the adoptive family to determine who's safe and who's best for this child. But that recognition that extended family is part of that child's identity, depending on the age. So I think it's really those myths and misperceptions, or that the system, it's just too complex. I couldn't possibly get involved in this child welfare system. It's a government system. And indeed, there are some challenges. There are frequently staffing issues. There are sometimes calls that aren't returned, or there have been foster families that don't feel like they've been supported through the process. So I think just doing really good research, talking to other adoptive families from an agency that you've selected, really making sure that this agency, once a family does move toward this option, that the agency feels right. And if at some point it doesn't feel right, then move to another agency. So those are really the challenges that we encounter. And then just this conversation. It's a complex conversation, right? And I don't mean to demean any other cause. Sometimes it's easier to say, let's support eradicating childhood cancer, because who among us wants to see a child suffer with a disease that we might be able to cure? It's not quite an easy conversation with child abuse and neglect and family dynamics of violence and the complexities of the child welfare system and the juvenile justice system and the education system that get all mixed into this conversation of children in foster care. And what's the cause that we're trying to push? It's simple for us. Every child deserves a family. Every child deserves to live and thrive to their best of their potential. But then that conversation has to go a little bit deeper for people to engage and understand where they can fit into this puzzle. as a donor, as a volunteer, as a foster parent, as an adoptive parent. So I think those are some of the challenges, but we love working with those challenges. We love dispelling the myths and misperceptions. We love explaining what this system is all about.
That is so great. So, what can we expect to see from the Dave Thomas Foundation come 2022 or beyond?
So, we're really on a track for taking Wendy's Wonderful Kids to scale. I shared that we have 12 states that are scaled and one province in Canada. We are deeply engaged, even in this pandemic, in conversation with 7 more states that we hope will turn into scaling. In other words, adding 20, 30, 40 more recruiters in those states as we work on a collaborative relationship. So really growing Wendy's Wonderful Kids, continuing to look at where are some of the important conversations that have come out of the last couple of years. It's been a tough time for this country, and some of that has to do with race issues. And we know that there's an overrepresentation of Black children and children of color in the child welfare system. And we have to address what are those deep conversations and why is that happening and where do we fit in making sure that we're not contributing to that overrepresentation? How do we make sure that diversity, equity, and inclusion, but racial equity and social justice are as much a part of our conversation as anything else that we talk about, so that we're helping to solve some of that issue as well. And then continuing these other programs that I've talked about, making sure they're robust, that they're timely, looking for additional ways. Adoption is not the exclamation point or the period at the end of this child welfare sentence. It's a comma. And families need to make sure they have support post-adoption, whether financial, emotional, physical support. And how do we engage in that post-adoption conversation as we're close to finalizing 11,000 adoptions now? How do we make sure families are supported at that other end of the spectrum so that they can continue to thrive and feel safe once they have adopted?
Just amazing. Awesome. If a listener would like to financially contribute, how can they do that?
It's wonderful. We welcome donors, and we want people to know we cherish and honor every donor. 90 cents of every dollar that comes into the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption goes right back out into programs like Wendy's Wonderful Kids and Adoption Friendly Workplace and National Adoption Day. So I want folks to know their dollars are well used and honored. They can go on to our website, davethomasfoundation.org, find how you donate. It's right there on that front page, and they can donate online. If they're more comfortable sending a check, our address is there. They can certainly send checks. But if they want to, really look at us and make sure that this is a good investment for them, we would welcome them to do that. We can talk to them about how their dollars can be used. We do have a small endowment if someone wants to put dollars into something that can help sustain us for the long term, or they can tell us how they want those dollars spent. We just want to honor those. But online is a quick and easy way, but certainly sending a check as well. And there are ways that we can get them connected too. It's tough as a national nonprofit to have, if people are in Columbus, Ohio, we welcome volunteers to help us with some of our administrative duties, but we can also get people that are interested in volunteering connected to agencies that we work with across the nation. Frequently, there are ways other than fostering or adopting with agencies, either as mentors, as folks that help out during holidays with gift drives. At school time, frequently there are backpack drives, all those kinds of things that happen within agencies. We're always delighted to get people connected with volunteer opportunities as well.
That is so good. I want to highlight the fact that you said 90 cents of every dollar goes directly to these programs, which before the job I'm currently in, I was working in a not-for-profit agency, and operating on 10% is amazing. That's wonderful. So I just want to highlight that that's such a great achievement, because a lot of companies can't say that they'll even get close to that. So that's wonderful.
Thank you. We try to keep it pretty lean and mean, but we want to attract the best as well. So it's a constant juggle, making sure that staff feel supported and secure in their job, but that donor dollars are supported and secure as well.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Well, Rita, thank you so much. I did want to say that I find myself kind of struggling a little bit when my friends or my colleagues ask how they can support children in foster care. They come to me thinking that I am somehow the expert. So this is going to be a great option for them. This year, for example, your grandma will ask you, what do you want for Christmas? And so instead of asking for gifts, you could say, I'd like a donation made to the Dave Thomas Foundation on my behalf. And of course, then both of you would feel great knowing that these funds are being used efficiently for a wonderful purpose.
That's a great idea. I know we have a lot of just very generous people that do Facebook fundraisers for us and do exactly that kind of thing. So yes. And again, we're happy to have one-on-one conversations to help people figure out what's best for them.
Wow, such great work. Thank you so much, Rita. I also want to give a thank you to Ruben, who is the best podcast editor ever to cut, splice, and remove my ums and my ahs and my awkward pauses. Ruben, as always, I really appreciate you. And of course, huge thanks to you, Rita, not only for joining me on the podcast today, but also for the amazing work you do and the leadership you provide so that your team can continue to help children in foster care, post-adoption. Thank you so much. This is such an amazing resource.
It was my pleasure. And thank you for helping us highlight this pure to my heart, dear to my heart, and certainly, hopefully, to so many others, this cause of making sure children have homes.
Absolutely. I will share resources, the website, web links, contact information for the Dave Thomas Foundation on my social media pages and in the description box below. And thank you again, Rita. I hope you have a wonderful week.
Thank you so much. You too.